Hello, English learners. Welcome back to Talk English Now. I'm Sarah, and today we're going to talk about sentences you can use in everyday life. Simple ones that start from the basics, and then more advanced sentences that will help you sound confident and natural in English conversations. Let's begin with the kind of sentences you can use when you meet someone. Imagine you walk into a cafe or you meet a friend in the street. You want to greet them in English. You can say something very simple like, "Hi, how are you?" Or you can change it a little to make it more natural. You might say, "Hey, how's it going?" Both of these are very common. If you want to sound polite in a slightly formal setting, you can say, "Hello, how are you doing today?" When someone asks you how you are, you need natural answers. Instead of always saying, "I'm fine, thank you," which sounds a bit robotic, try saying things like, "I'm good, thanks. How about you?" Or, "I'm doing well, thanks for asking." Or if you're having a busy day, you could say, "I've been really busy, but I'm managing." These are real sentences people use every day. Now, think about the small talk that often happens after greetings. Someone might ask about your plans. You can say, "I'm just heading to work," or "I'm on my way to class." If you are meeting a friend later, you can say, "I'm meeting a friend for coffee this afternoon." Notice how natural it sounds when you add a bit of detail. This is what takes your English from basic to advanced. Another common situation is when you want to introduce yourself. You can say, "Hi, my name is Sarah, nice to meet you." Or if you want a slightly more advanced version, "I'm Sarah, it's a pleasure to meet you." When you respond to someone introducing themselves, you can say, "Nice to meet you too," or more warmly, "It's great to finally meet you." Let's move into sentences for everyday activities. Imagine you're in a shop. You want to ask for help. You can say, "Excuse me, could you help me?" Or, "Excuse me, where can I find the bread section?" If you're looking for something specific, you can say, "Do you have this in a different size?" Or, "Could you please tell me the price of this item?" These are practical and polite. When you buy something, you'll need sentences at the checkout. You can say, "I'd like to pay by card," or "Can I pay in cash?" If you're unsure about the price, you can say, "Is this on sale?" Or, "Does this come with a discount?" If you want to be polite, always add "please" and "thank you" at the end. Now, let's practice sentences for cafes and restaurants. When you arrive, you might say, "Table for two, please," or "Could we sit by the window?" When ordering, you can say, "I'd like a coffee, please," or "Can I have the chicken sandwich?" If you want to sound more advanced, you can say, "Could I get the grilled chicken with a side salad, please?" If you want to ask for something specific, try, "Can I have that without onions?" When the food arrives, it's polite to say, "Thank you very much." If you need something during your meal, you can say, "Excuse me, could I get some more water?" Or, "Could you bring us the bill, please?" These are all sentences you will use again and again. Let's move into sentences you might use at work or in school. When you need to ask for clarification, you can say, "Could you explain that again, please?" Or, "I didn't quite understand. Could you repeat that?" If you want to check information, you can say, "Just to confirm, the meeting is at 2:00, right?" Or, "So we need to finish this project by Friday, correct?" These are more advanced. because they show active communication. When you give your own opinion, you can say, I think this is a good idea. Or, more advanced, in my opinion, this approach might work better. If you want to politely disagree, you can say, I see your point, but I think we should also consider. This way, your English sounds respectful and professional. Now imagine you are traveling. At the airport, you can say, Excuse me, where is the check-in desk? Or, how long is the flight delayed? On the plane, you can say, Could I have a blanket, please? At the hotel, you might say, I have a reservation under the name Sarah. Or, Could I check in early, please? If you need something in your room, you can say, Could you send extra towels to room 305? In daily life, you also need sentences for asking about directions. You can say, Excuse me, how do I get to the train station? Or, Is there a bus stop near here? If someone gives you directions, you can say, So I turn left at the traffic lights and then go straight? Repeating part of the direction is advanced because it shows you are confirming. Let's think about making plans with friends. You can say, Do you want to hang out this weekend? Or, Are you free for coffee tomorrow afternoon? If you want to suggest something, you can say, How about going to the cinema? Or, Why don't we try that new restaurant? To confirm, you can say, That sounds perfect. Let's meet at 6. When you cancel or change plans, you can say, I'm really sorry, but I can't make it tonight. Or, Can we reschedule for another day? If you're apologizing politely, you can add, I hope that's okay. These kinds of sentences keep your English natural and polite. Let's also include sentences for everyday feelings. You can say, I'm really tired today. Or, I'm feeling a bit under the weather. That means you're not feeling well. If you're excited, you can say, I'm really looking forward to the weekend. Or, I can't wait to see that movie. For advanced learners, you can say, I'm absolutely thrilled about the news. Or, I'm a little nervous about the interview tomorrow. In conversations, people often ask about your hobbies or free time. You can say, I like reading books in my free time. Or, I enjoy watching movies. To make it sound more advanced, you can say, In my free time, I love exploring new places and trying new food. Or, One of my favorite hobbies is playing the guitar. When you want to ask about someone else, you can say, What do you usually do in your free time? Or, Do you have any hobbies? Let's practice sentences for expressing preferences. You can say, I prefer tea over coffee, or I'd rather stay home tonight. If you want to make it sound advanced, you can say, Personally, I find traveling by train more relaxing than flying. Or, I tend to enjoy quiet evenings more than loud parties. When you ask about someone else, you can say, Do you prefer tea or coffee? Or, Would you rather go out or stay in? Sometimes you need to ask for permission. You can say, Can I use your phone? Or, Is it okay if I open the window? In more formal English, you can say, Would you mind if I borrowed your book? Or, Do you mind if I say it here? These are polite and useful in many daily situations. In English conversations, you also need sentences for showing agreement. You can say, That's right, or Exactly. If you want to sound advanced, you can say, I completely agree with you, or That's a very good point. To show strong agreement, you can say, absolutely, or you're absolutely right. If you don't agree, you can be polite by saying, I'm not so sure about that, or I see it differently. A more advanced way is, I understand your point, but I have a different perspective. This shows you are respectful while giving your own view. And when you want to end a conversation politely, you can say, it was nice talking to you, or I'll see you later. A slightly advanced version is, it was great catching up with you, or let's stay in touch. These are warm and friendly ways to close a conversation. Let's continue with more sentences that are useful in everyday life. One very common situation is asking for help. You might say, excuse me, could you help me with this? Or, can you give me a hand? These are very natural. If you want to be more advanced, you could say, would you mind helping me out for a moment? Or, I'd really appreciate your help with this. These sound polite and respectful. When someone helps you, it's important to show gratitude. You can say, thanks a lot, or thank you so much. For a slightly stronger expression, you might say, I really appreciate your help, or that means a lot to me. To sound very natural, you could add, you've been a great help. Now let's move to sentences for apologizing. You can say, I'm sorry, or I'm really sorry about that. If you want to be more formal, you can say, I apologize for the mistake, or please accept my apologies. If you want to show concern, you can say, I didn't mean to upset you, or I hope you're not too upset. These are useful in both personal and professional conversations. Sometimes you need to ask for information. You can say, could you tell me where the library is? Or, do you know what time the shop closes? If you want to sound a little more advanced, you might say, I was wondering if you could tell me how to get to the station. Or, would you happen to know when the next bus leaves? These structures make you sound polite and fluent. In daily conversations, people often ask for opinions. If someone asks what you think, you can say, I think it's a good idea, or I don't really like it. To make it sound more advanced, you could say, from my point of view, it's a great solution, or personally, I don't find that approach very effective. When you want to ask about someone else's opinion, you can say, what do you think about this? Or, how do you feel about that? Let's practice sentences for offering help. You can say, can I help you with that? Or, do you need any help? If you want to sound warmer, you can say, would you like me to give you a hand? Or, if you need anything, just let me know. When someone offers help to you, you can respond by saying, that would be great, thank you. Or, I appreciate it, but I'm fine. Both are polite ways to answer. Another daily situation is making phone calls. You can start by saying, hello, this is Sarah speaking, or, hi, can I speak to John, please? If you want to ask someone to wait, you can say, could you hold on a moment, please? If you want to leave a message, you can say, can I leave a message for him? If you're calling for information, you can say, I'm calling to ask about your opening hours. These sentences are practical and realistic. Let's move into sentences for expressing likes and dislikes. You can say, I like this movie, or I don't like this food. To make it more advanced, you can say, I really enjoy listening to music in the evenings, or I'm not very keen on spicy food. Another natural phrase is, I'm a big fan of Italian food, or I can't stand waking up early. These are real sentences that native speakers use. When you want to agree with someone, you can say, that's true, or I agree with you. If you want to show stronger agreement, you can say, that's exactly how I feel, or I couldn't agree more. To show polite disagreement, you might say, I see your point, but I think, or I understand, but I don't completely agree. These phrases help you have smoother and more respectful conversations. Let's also include sentences for talking about the past. You can say, I went to the park yesterday, or I studied English last night. To make it more advanced, you could say, I spent the weekend with my family, or I had a great time at the party. If you want to talk about experiences, you can say, I've been to London twice, or I've never tried sushi before. These are simple but very powerful structures. Now, let's focus on future sentences. You can say, I will call you tomorrow, or I'm going to visit my friend. If you want to sound more advanced, you could say, I'm planning to travel next month, or I'm thinking about starting a new hobby. To talk about arrangements, you can say, we're meeting at 7, or I've already booked the tickets. These show different ways to talk about the future naturally. Another important skill is making requests. You can say, can you help me with this? Or, could you open the window, please? If you want to be more formal, you can say, whoa, do you mind helping me with my homework? Or, would it be possible for you to explain that again? These polite structures are very common in daily life. Now, let's practice sentences for expressing needs and wants. You can say, I need some water, or I want to go home. For more advanced sentences, you can say, I need to finish this report by tomorrow, or I want to improve my English fluency. If you want to soften the request, you can say, I'd like a cup of tea, please, or I'd love to join you for dinner. These are friendly and polite ways of speaking. When you're in social situations, you may need sentences for introducing other people. You can say, this is my friend John, or have you met my colleague Anna? A slightly advanced version is, I'd like you to meet my friend David, or let me introduce you to Sarah, she's a great teacher. When someone introduces you, you can respond with, it's nice to meet you, or I've heard so much about you. Let's also practice sentences for showing interest in conversations. You can say, really? Or, that's interesting. If you want to sound more advanced, you can say, wow, that sounds amazing. Or, I'd love to hear more about that. Another good one is, that must have been exciting for you. Or, how did you feel about that? These kinds of sentences keep the conversation alive and natural. When you're asking about time, you can say, what time is it? Or, do you know what time the train leaves? If you want a more advanced version, you can say, could you tell me when the next bus arrives? Or, do you happen to know how long the meeting will last? These are polite and practical in daily life. Now let's think about health situations. You might say, I don't feel well, or I need to see a doctor. For a more advanced version, you can say, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, or I've been having a headache since morning. If you're at the doctor's office, you can say, I have an appointment with Dr. Smith at 3 o'clock. Or, I'd like to book a checkup, please. These sentences are realistic and helpful. Let's also cover sentences for emergencies. You can say, call the police, or I need help. In a more specific way, you could say, please call an ambulance, or I've lost my wallet. What should I do? If you need urgent help, you can say, there's been an accident. Please hurry. These are sentences we hope you won't need often, but they're important to know. Another daily area is transportation. You can say, where is the bus stop? Or, how much is the ticket? For a more advanced version, you might say, could you tell me where I can buy a train ticket? Or, do I need to change trains to get there? On a taxi ride, you can say, could you take me to the airport, please? Or, can you drop me off at the main station? These are simple but very practical sentences for travel. At this point, we've practiced a wide range of daily situations. Remember, the goal is not just to memorize these sentences. It's to feel confident using them when you actually need them. So try repeating them after me, or imagine yourself using them in real conversations. That way, they'll stay in your memory much longer. And if you're enjoying this lesson, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more daily English practice. It really helps you keep learning every day, and it helps us reach more learners just like you. Let's keep going with more essential sentences you can see in everyday conversations. One very common area is talking about the weather. You can say, it's sunny today, or it's really cold outside. To make it sound more advanced, you could say, it looks like it's going to rain later, or the weather has been unpredictable lately. If you want to sound conversational, you might say, what a beautiful day, isn't it? Or, this heat is unbearable. Weather is such a common topic in small talk, so having these sentences ready will help you feel more natural. Now, think about sentences for asking and answering about location. You can say, where are you from? Or, I'm from Pakistan. To make it more advanced, you could say, I grew up in a small town near the capital. Or, I was born in Italy, but I've lived in London for 5 years. When you want to ask about someone else, you can say, do you live around here? Or, how long have you lived in this city? These are very natural questions and answers in everyday conversations. Let's practice talking about family. You might say, I have 2 brothers, or I don't have any sisters. To make it sound more advanced, you could say, I'm the youngest in my family, or I come from a big family with 4 siblings. When you ask about someone else, you can say, do you have any brothers or sisters? Or, are you close to your family? These are warm, personal sentences that make conversations feel friendly. Another important area is talking about your job or studies. You can say, I'm a teacher, or I'm studying English at university. To sound more advanced, you might say, I work as a software engineer at a tech company. Or, I'm currently taking courses to improve my skills. If you want to ask about someone else, you can say, "What do you do for a living?" Or, "Are you studying or working at the moment?" These are practical and polite. When talking about your daily routine, you can say, "I wake up at 7 every morning," or "I usually have breakfast at home." To make it more advanced, you could say, "I start my day with a quick workout before heading to work," or "In the evenings, I like to read before going to bed." When you ask about someone else's routine, you can say, "What time do you usually wake up?" Or, "How do you usually spend your weekends?" Let's move to sentences for expressing surprise. You can say, "Really?" Or, "Are you serious?" To sound more advanced, you could say, "That's unbelievable," or "I can't believe it." If you want to show excitement, you can say, "That's amazing news," or "Wow, that's incredible." These sentences make your conversations more expressive and natural. Sometimes you'll need to show sympathy or concern. You can say, "I'm sorry to hear that," or "That must be difficult for you." To make it sound warmer, you might say, "I can't imagine how hard that must be." Or, "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." These sentences show kindness and make your English feel more caring. Now let's practice sentences for celebrations and good news. You can say, "Congratulations," or "Well done." To make it more advanced, you can say, "Congratulations on your promotion," or "That's fantastic news, I'm so happy for you." When you want to celebrate with someone, you can say, "Let's go out and celebrate." Or, "This calls for a celebration." These are joyful and encouraging sentences. Another useful set of sentences is for making suggestions. You can say, "Let's go for a walk," or "How about watching a movie?" To make it more advanced, you can say, "Why don't we try that new restaurant downtown?" Or, "Maybe we could plan a trip next month." When someone makes a suggestion, you can respond by saying, "That sounds great," or "I'd love to." If you don't agree, you can say, "I'm not really in the mood for that," or "Maybe another time." Now let's look at sentences for offering something to someone. You can say, "Would you like some tea?" Or, "Do you want a piece of cake?" A more advanced version is, "Can I offer you something to drink?" Or, "Would you like me to get you a glass of water?" When someone offers you something, you can say, "Yes, please," or "No, thank you, I'm fine." Both are polite responses. Sometimes you need to ask for advice. You can say, "What should I do?" Or, "Do you have any advice?" A slightly more advanced version is, "I'm not sure what to do. What would you suggest?" Or, "Do you think I should apply for this job?" When you give advice, you can say, "I think you should try it," or "Maybe you could talk to your teacher about it." These are simple but powerful sentences in daily conversations. Let's practice sentences for invitations. You can say, "Do you want to come to my party?" Or, "Would you like to join us for dinner?" To make it more advanced, you could say, "We're having a small gathering this weekend. Would you like to come?" Or, "I'd love for you to join us on Saturday." When you accept an invitation, you can say, "Sure, I'd love to," or "That sounds wonderful." When you decline politely, you can say, "I'm sorry, I can't make it," or "Thanks for the invitation, but I'm busy that day." Now let's move into sentences for shopping. You can say, "How much is this?" Or, "Do you have this in a larger size?" A more advanced version could be, "Could you tell me if this comes in other colors?" Or, "I'm looking for a pair of shoes in size 9, do you have any?" At the cashier, you can say, "Can I pay by card?" Or, "Could you give me a receipt, please?" These are essential for real shopping conversations. When you're at the doctor's office, you might need sentences to describe your condition. You can say, "I have a headache," or "I don't feel well." A more advanced version is, "I've been feeling dizzy since yesterday," or "I've had a cough for a week." When asking for treatment, you can say, "What do you recommend?" Or, "Do I need to take any medicine?" These are useful and realistic. Let's also cover sentences for technology. You can say, "My phone isn't working," or "The internet is slow." A more advanced version is, "I can't connect to the Wi-Fi. Could you check it?" Or, "The app keeps crashing when I open it." If you're asking for help, you can say, "Do you know how to fix this problem?" Or, "Can you help me set up my laptop?" Technology is part of daily life, so these sentences are important too. In casual conversations, you may want to show excitement. You can say, "That's great," or "Awesome." A more advanced way is, "That's fantastic news. I'm so happy to hear that." Or, "That's wonderful. I'm excited for you." To show curiosity, you can say, "Really? Tell me more." Or, "That sounds interesting. What happened next?" These keep conversations alive and engaging. Sometimes you'll need sentences for talking about goals. You can say, "I want to learn English," or "I want to travel." A more advanced version is, "My goal is to become fluent in English within a year," or "I'm working towards starting my own business." When asking about someone else's goals, you can say, "What are your plans for the future?" Or, "What do you hope to achieve this year?" These are motivating and natural. Let's also practice sentences for asking for clarification. You can say, "What do you mean?" Or, "Could you explain that?" A more advanced version is, "I'm not sure I understand. Could you go over it again?" Or, "Do you mean that we need to finish this today?" These sentences help you keep the conversation clear. Finally, for this section, let's look at sentences for expressing possibilities. You can say, "Maybe I'll go," or "I might stay home tonight." A more advanced version is, "There's a chance I won't be able to make it," or "It's possible that I'll be late." These structures make your English more flexible and natural. Let's continue with more practical sentences you can use every single day. One common area is transportation, especially if you live in a busy city. You can say, "Does this bus go to the city center?" Or, "How long does it take to get there?" To make it more advanced, you might say, "Could you tell me where I need to get off for the museum?" Or, "Do I need to buy a ticket before getting on the train?" These are the types of questions travelers ask all the time, and they'll make you sound natural when you move around in English-speaking places. When you're in a taxi or rideshare, you can say, "Can you take me to the airport, please?" Or, "Could you drop me off near the main entrance?" If you want to give more specific instructions, you can say, "Please stop at the corner of Pine Street and Fifth Avenue," or "Could you take the faster route if possible?" These are helpful when you're giving directions to a driver. Now let's move into sentences for visiting the doctor or pharmacy. You can say, "I'd like to see a doctor, please," or "I have an appointment at 2 o'clock." A more advanced version could be, "I've been feeling sick for the past 3 days," or "I need something for a sore throat. What would you recommend?" At the pharmacy, you might say, "Do you sell painkillers here?" Or, "Could I get something for a cough, please?" These sentences are practical and polite, and they'll help you when you're not feeling your best. Let's also talk about sentences for emergencies. You can say, "I need help," or "Please call the police." If you want to be more specific, you can say, "There's been an accident, please call an ambulance," or "I've lost my passport, what should I do?" In an urgent situation, you might say, "Please help me, it's an emergency." These are sentences that you hope you won't need, but it's important to know them just in case. In daily life, people also talk a lot about food. When you're at a restaurant, you can say, "Could I see the menu, please?" Or, "What do you recommend?" To order politely, you can say, "I'd like the grilled fish with vegetables, please." Or, "Can I have the chicken curry but without peanuts?" If you're asking about drinks, you can say, "Could I get a glass of water?" Or, "I'd like a cup of tea, please." When you finish eating, you can say, "Could we have the bill, please?" Or, "Is service included?" These sentences make dining out much easier. Let's practice sentences for expressing gratitude in daily situations. You can say, "Thanks," or "Thanks a lot." For a warmer tone, you might say, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate it." Or, "That was very kind of you." If you want to show strong gratitude, you can say, "I'm truly grateful for your help." Or, "I can't thank you enough." These make your English polite and expressive. Sometimes you need to say sorry. You can say, "I'm sorry," or "Sorry about that." If you want to show more care, you can say, "I'm really sorry for the trouble," or "I apologize for being late." A more advanced version is, "Please accept my apologies, it won't happen again," or "I didn't mean to cause any inconvenience." These sentences keep your conversations respectful and kind. Now let's practice sentences for social interactions. Imagine you meet someone new. You can say, "Hi, nice to meet you," or "It's a pleasure to meet you." When you want to ask about someone, you can say, "Where are you from?" or "What do you do for a living?" To continue the conversation, you can say, "Do you like living here?" or "Have you been here long?" These are easy ways to connect with others and make friends. In conversations, sometimes you need to agree or disagree politely. You can say, "I think so too," or "That's true." For stronger agreement, you can say, "Absolutely, I couldn't agree more," or "That's exactly how I feel." To disagree, you can say, "I'm not sure I agree with that," or "I see it differently." A more advanced version is, "I understand your point, but I have a different opinion." These are polite and useful ways to share your thoughts. Let's move into sentences for making plans. You can say, "Do you want to hang out this weekend?" Or, "Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" To suggest an idea, you can say, "How about going for a walk in the park?" Or, "Why don't we go see a movie?" When you agree, you can say, "That sounds good," or "Perfect," let's do that. If you can't make it, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm busy that day, or can we reschedule for another time? These sentences make planning with friends much smoother. Another important set of sentences is for traveling abroad. At the airport, you can say, where is the check-in counter? Or, how many bags can I take with me? When you go through security, you might say, do I need to take off my shoes? Or, can I take this in my carry-on? On the plane, you can say, could I have a glass of water, please? Or, excuse me, may I change my seat? At the hotel, you can say, I'd like to check in, my name is Sarah. Or, could I have a room with a view, please? These sentences will help you feel more confident when traveling. Let's practice sentences for shopping, because that's something everyone does. In a clothing store, you can say, can I try this on? Or, do you have this in a medium size? At the supermarket, you can say, where can I find the milk? Or, could you tell me if this is on sale? At the cashier, you can say, can I pay by card? Or, could you give me a bag, please? These are simple but very common sentences. Sometimes you'll want to talk about your feelings. You can say, I'm happy today, or I feel sad. To make it more advanced, you could say, I'm really excited about the weekend, or I'm a bit nervous about my presentation. If you want to sound more expressive, you can say, I'm absolutely thrilled about the news, or I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. Talking about feelings is part of natural conversation. Let's also practice sentences for hobbies and free time. You can say, I like reading books, or I enjoy playing football. To make it more advanced, you could say, in my free time, I love going for long walks in nature. Or, one of my favorite hobbies is cooking new recipes. When you ask about someone else, you can say, what do you usually do in your free time? Or, do you have any hobbies? These are perfect for making small talk and finding common interests. When you want to give advice, you can say, you should try it. Or, it would be better if you studied a little every day. A more advanced version is, if I were you, I'd take that opportunity. Or, it might be a good idea to practice speaking with a friend. These sentences help you share suggestions politely and naturally. Finally, for this section, let's look at sentences for encouragement. You can say, you can do it, or don't give up. To sound stronger, you can say, I believe in you, or keep going, you're making great progress. A more advanced version is, I know it's difficult, but you're doing an amazing job, or stay confident, your hard work will pay off. Encouraging sentences make conversations positive and supportive. Let's keep building with more sentences you can use in conversations every day. Another common situation is being at school or in class. You can say, could you repeat that, please? Or, can you explain this again? To sound more advanced, you could say, I didn't quite catch that. Could you go over it once more? Or, would you mind clarifying what you meant by that? When you want to participate, you can say, I think the answer is, or, in my opinion, this could mean. These are sentences that make you sound active and engaged. When you're working on group projects or teamwork, you can say, let's work together on this, or, can we divide the tasks? To make it more advanced, you might say, "Why don't we split the work so it's easier for everyone?" Or, "Shall we set a deadline to keep things on track?" These sentences help you contribute in a natural way. Let's move into sentences for asking and giving directions in detail. You can say, "Go straight ahead," or "Turn left at the corner." To make it more advanced, you can say, "If you go down this street and take the second right, you'll see it on your left." Or, "Walk past the supermarket, then cross the street, and the bank will be right there." When asking, you can say, "Could you tell me the way to the nearest bus stop?" Or, "How do I get to the train station from here?" These are realistic and very practical. Now let's practice sentences for banking or financial situations. You can say, "I'd like to open an account," or "Can I withdraw some money, please?" To sound more advanced, you could say, "Could you tell me what documents I need to open a bank account?" Or, "I'd like to transfer some money to another account." At the counter, you might say, "Can I change dollars into euros here?" Or, "Could you explain the fees for national transfers?" These sentences are useful in many real-life settings. Another important area is sentences for technology support. You can say, "My computer isn't working," or "The internet is down." To make it more advanced, you could say, "I can't connect to the Wi-Fi, could you check the router?" Or, "The application keeps freezing whenever I try to open it." When you're asking for help, you can say, "Do you know how to fix this?" Or, "Could you show me how to reset the password?" These are sentences that fit perfectly in modern conversations. Let's talk about sentences for time management. You can say, "I'm late," or "I'll be there soon." For more advanced sentences, you could say, "I'm running a little behind schedule, but I'll be there shortly." Or, "Let's meet at 3:30 instead of 3:00. If you want to ask, you can say, "What time should we meet?" Or, "When does the meeting start?" These keep your daily conversations practical and smooth. Sometimes you'll need sentences for talking about preferences when making choices. You can say, "I prefer tea," or "I'd rather stay home." To sound more advanced, you could say, "I usually prefer quiet evenings over noisy parties." Or, "I'd rather take the bus because it's cheaper and easier." When asking someone, you can say, "Which one do you prefer?" Or, "Would you rather stay in or go out?" These are useful in social and casual contexts. Now let's practice sentences for showing interest in conversations. You can say, "That's interesting," or "Really?" To make it more advanced, you can say, "Wow, that sounds fascinating," or "That must have been an amazing experience for you." When you want to keep the conversation going, you can say, "Tell me more about that," or "How did that happen?" These small but powerful sentences make you sound engaged. In daily conversations, humor is also important. You can say, "That's funny," or "You're joking." To sound more advanced, you could say, "That made me laugh out loud," or "You always know how to make me smile." If you want to show amusement, you can say, "That's hilarious," or "I can't stop laughing." These add lightness and fun to your English. Let's also practice sentences for handling problems. You can say, "Something's wrong," or "This isn't working." To make it more advanced, you could say, We seem to have a problem. Let's find a solution. Or, this issue needs to be fixed before we continue. When asking for help, you can say, "Can you take a look at this?" Or, "Do you know how to solve this?" These sentences are useful in work, study, and daily life. Now let's focus on sentences for talking about experiences. You can say, "I went to the park yesterday," or "I visited my grandparents last weekend." To make it more advanced, you might say, "I spent my holiday traveling around the country," or "Last year I had the chance to visit Paris." When you ask someone, you can say, "Have you ever been to New York?" or "What did you do last weekend?" These are excellent for building natural conversations. Sometimes you'll want to talk about future plans. You can say, "I'm going to visit my friend tomorrow," or "I'll call you later." For more advanced sentences, you could say, "I'm planning to take a trip next summer," or "I'm thinking of starting a new course." If you want to check with someone, you can say, "Are you free next week?" or "Do you want to meet on Saturday?" These sentences help you connect your English with real life. Let's also look at sentences for daily routine details. You can say, "I wake up early," or "I go to bed late." A more advanced version is, "I usually start my mornings with a cup of coffee and a short walk," or "I try to read for 30 minutes before I go to sleep." When asking, you can say, "What's your morning routine like?" or "Do you usually eat breakfast at home or outside?" These give you plenty of practice for natural conversations. Now let's practice sentences for shopping online. You can say, "I'd like to buy this," or "How much is the delivery?" To make it more advanced, you could say, "Could you tell me when the order will arrive?" Or, "I'd like to return this item. What's the process?" If you want to ask for details, you can say, "Does this come in other sizes?" or "Is there a warranty on this product?" These are sentences you'll use more and more in modern life. In personal conversations, you'll also want to talk about emotions and opinions. You can say, "I like it," or "I don't like it." A more advanced way is, "I really enjoyed that experience," or "I wasn't very happy with the result." When asking someone, you can say, "What do you think of it?" or "How did you feel about that?" These are the building blocks of natural English. Finally, for this section, let's look at sentences for encouragement and motivation. You can say, "Keep going," or "Don't give up." A stronger version is, "You're doing a great job, keep it up," or "I believe in you, you can achieve this." If you want to show empathy, you might say, "I know it's tough, but you're stronger than you think," or "Stay positive, better days are coming." These are sentences that not only improve your English, but also make you a supportive speaker. Let's move forward with even more sentences that will help you in everyday conversations. One common area is talking about travel experiences. You can say, "I went to the beach last summer," or "I visited a new city during my holiday." To make it more advanced, you could say, "I spent 2 weeks exploring different parts of Spain," or "During my last trip, I had the chance to try new foods and meet new people." When asking others, you can say, "Have you traveled anywhere recently?" or "What was your favorite trip?" These sentences make conversations personal and interesting. Let's practice sentences for talking about food and drinks in casual conversations. You can say, I like pizza, or I don't like coffee. To sound more advanced, you might say, I really enjoy trying different kinds of pasta, or I'm not a big fan of sugary drinks. When asking someone, you can say, what's your favorite food? Or, do you prefer tea or coffee? These small sentences keep conversations lively and friendly. Now let's include sentences for talking about the weekend. You can say, what are you doing this weekend? Or, do you have any plans for Saturday? To make it more advanced, you might say, I'm planning to spend the weekend with my family. Or, I'm thinking of going hiking if the weather is nice. When talking about last weekend, you can say, I stayed home and relaxed. Or, I went out with friends on Sunday. These are natural and simple ways to connect with people. Let's practice sentences for feelings and emotions in more detail. You can say, I'm happy, or I'm sad. To sound more advanced, you could say, I'm really proud of what I achieved today, or I felt nervous before my presentation. Another way is, I was surprised by the news, or I'm excited about tomorrow's event. These help you express yourself more clearly and naturally. In professional settings, you might need sentences for meetings and teamwork. You can say, let's start the meeting. Or, can we discuss the next steps? To sound more advanced, you could say, I'd like to share my thoughts on this topic. Or, shall we go over the main points before we finish? When you want to agree, you can say, that makes sense, or I think you're right. When you want to politely disagree, you can say, I understand your point, but I see it differently. Or, that's an interesting idea, but I think we should also consider another option. These are polite and professional ways to communicate. Now let's move into sentences for phone conversations. You can say, hello, may I speak to John, please? Or, this is Sarah, I'm calling about our appointment. If you want to ask someone to wait, you can say, could you hold on for a moment? Or, just a second, please. When you want to leave a message, you can say, can I leave a message? Or, please tell him that Sarah called. If you want to check information, you can say, could you confirm the time of our meeting? Or, what's the address again? These sentences are realistic and very helpful for daily phone calls. Let's practice sentences for making complaints politely. You can say, I'm not happy with this service, or this product doesn't work. To sound more advanced, you could say, excuse me, I'd like to make a complaint about my order, or I'm sorry, but this meal is cold. Could you replace it? If you want to ask for action, you can say, could you please fix this issue for me? Or, can I speak to the manager, please? These sentences are useful in real-life situations when something goes wrong. Sometimes you need sentences for congratulating others. You can say, congratulations, or well done. To make it more advanced, you could say, congratulations on your graduation, or that's wonderful news, I'm so happy for you. When you want to celebrate, you can say, let's go out and celebrate together, or this is a big achievement, you should be proud. These keep your conversations supportive and joyful. let's include sentences for encouraging people. You can say, "Don't give up," or "Keep going." To sound more advanced, you might say, "You're making great progress. Keep it up." Or, "I know it's tough, but you can do it." Another way is, "Stay confident. Your hard work will pay off." Or, "I believe in you. Don't stop now." These are uplifting sentences that create positive conversations. In daily conversations, sometimes you talk about the news or current events. You can say, "Did you hear the news?" Or, "What do you think about what happened yesterday?" To make it more advanced, you could say, "I read an interesting article about climate change." Or, "There's been a lot of discussion about the new policy." When asking someone, you can say, "Have you heard about it?" Or, "What's your opinion on that?" These sentences are practical for more advanced discussions. Now let's practice sentences for giving directions inside buildings. You can say, "Go straight down the hall," or "Turn right after the elevator." To make it more advanced, you could say, "If you go past the reception, the office will be on your left." Or, "Take the stairs to the second floor, then turn left, and it's the third door on the right." When asking, you can say, "Could you tell me where the restroom is?" Or, "How do I get to the conference room?" These are simple but very useful. Let's also cover sentence. As for talking about learning and practice, you can say, "I'm learning English," or "I study every day." To make it more advanced, you might say, "I've been practicing my English for 2 years," or "I'm trying to improve my fluency by listening to podcasts." When asking, you can say, "How long have you been studying English?" Or, "What's the best way to practice speaking?" These are helpful when talking with other learners. In everyday life, you might need sentences for borrowing and lending. You can say, "Can I borrow your pen?" Or, "Can you lend me some money?" To sound more advanced, you could say, "Would you mind if I borrowed your book for a week?" Or, "Could you lend me your notes for the class? I'll give them back tomorrow." When someone asks you, you can say, "Sure, here you go," or "Sorry, I don't have it with me right now." These keep your English polite and friendly. Sometimes you'll want to ask about price or value. You can say, "How much is this?" Or, "Is it expensive?" To sound more advanced, you might say, "Could you tell me the price of this item?" Or, "Is there a discount available?" When you respond, you can say, "It's a bit expensive, but it's worth it." Or, "That's a good deal." These sentences are useful in shopping and business conversations. Finally, for this section, let's look at sentences for expressing certainty and uncertainty. You can say, "I'm sure," or "I don't know." To sound more advanced, you could say, "I'm absolutely certain about this," or "I'm not entirely sure, but I think so." Another way is, "It's hard to say, but it seems possible," or "There's no doubt in my mind." These sentences give you flexibility when speaking in daily life. Let's continue with more essential sentences you can use every single day. One very common situation is asking about health and feelings. You can say, "How are you feeling today?" or "Are you okay?" To make it more advanced, you could say, "You don't look well. Are you feeling all right?" Or, "Have you been feeling better since last week?" When you answer, you can say, I'm feeling much better, thank you. Or, I'm still a little tired, but I'll be fine. These are caring and natural sentences for everyday conversations. Now let's practice sentences for offering and accepting invitations. You can say, would you like to come over for dinner? Or, do you want to join us for a picnic? To sound more advanced, you might say, we're having a few friends over on Saturday evening. Would you like to come? Or, I'd love for you to join us this weekend if you're free. When you accept, you can say, yes, I'd love to, thank you. Or, that sounds perfect. When you decline politely, you can say, I'm sorry, I can't make it this time. Or, thanks for inviting me, but I'm busy that day. Let's look at sentences for expressing opinions more clearly. You can say, I think it's good, or I don't like it. To sound more advanced, you could say, in my opinion, it's a great idea, or personally, I don't find it very helpful. Another way is, from my perspective, this is the best choice. Or, I understand your point, but I see it differently. These are sentences that help you take part in real conversations and discussions. Sometimes you'll want to talk about your goals and dreams. You can say, I want to be a teacher, or I want to travel the world. To make it more advanced, you could say, my dream is to become fluent in English so I can work abroad. Or, one of my biggest goals is to start my own Zen business. When you ask someone else, you can say, what do you hope to achieve in the future? Or, do you have a dream you're working toward? These are motivational and personal sentences. Let's also practice sentences for talking about routines in more detail. You can say, I usually go for a walk in the evening, or I watch TV after dinner. To sound more advanced, you might say, most evenings I spend some time reading before I go to sleep. Or, every morning I try to start my day with some exercise and a healthy breakfast. When asking, you can say, what do you usually do after work? Or, do you normally cook at home or eat out? These are natural ways to talk about everyday life. Now let's include sentences for asking for clarification politely. You can say, what do you mean? Or, can you explain that? To sound more advanced, you could say, I didn't quite understand. Could you explain it again? Or, do you mean that we should start earlier? These are excellent for making sure you understand correctly in conversations. Another important set of sentences is for asking for and giving permission. You can say, can I open the window? Or, is it okay if I use your phone? To sound more advanced, you might say, would you mind if I borrowed your pen for a moment? Or, do you mind if I sit here? When you give permission, you can say, sure, go ahead. Or, of course, no problem. These keep your English polite and respectful. Let's practice sentences for expressing possibilities and probabilities. You can say, maybe I'll go. Or, I might stay home. To make it more advanced, you could say, there's a chance I won't be able to make it. Or, it's possible that I'll arrive late. If you're more certain, you can say, I'll definitely be there, or I'm sure it will. A workout. These sentences give you flexibility in conversations. Sometimes you need sentences for expressing likes and dislikes more clearly. You can say, I like it, or I don't like it. To sound more advanced, you might say, I really enjoy listening to music in the evenings, or I'm not very keen on spicy food. Another way is, I'm a huge fan of action movies, or I can't stand waiting in long lines. These sentences make you sound natural and expressive. Let's also practice sentences for making suggestions and recommendations. You can say, let's go to the park, or how about having pizza tonight? To make it more advanced, you might say, why don't we try that new restaurant downtown? Or maybe we could plan a short trip this weekend. When giving advice, you can say, you should read this book, it's great. Or, I think you'd enjoy that movie. These are sentences that help conversations move forward. In social settings, sometimes you want to end a conversation politely. You can say, it was nice talking to you, or see you later. To sound more advanced, you might say, it was great catching up with you, let's do this again soon, or I enjoyed our conversation, let's stay in touch. These sentences leave a good impression and keep connections strong. Let's move to sentences for encouragement once again, because they're so powerful. You can say, don't worry, you'll be fine. Or, keep practicing, you're improving. To sound more advanced, you could say, you're making progress every day, don't stop now. Or, I know it's challenging, but you're stronger than you think. These supportive sentences not only help in English, but also in life. Now let's look at sentences for travel and exploration. You can say, where is the nearest train station? Or, how much is a ticket to London? To make it more advanced, you might say, could you tell me the fastest way to get to the airport? Or, do I need to change trains for the city center? At the hotel, you can say, can I have a late checkout, please? Or, could you recommend a good restaurant nearby? These sentences are perfect for real-life travel. Sometimes you want to ask for someone's opinion politely. You can say, do you like it? Or, what do you think? To sound more advanced, you could say, what's your opinion on this? Or, how do you feel about this idea? When you want to share your own opinion, you can say, I think it's a good idea. Or, in my view, it could be improved. These are simple, yet effective. Finally, let's practice sentences for everyday encouragement in English learning itself. You can say, keep practicing your English, or don't give up on learning. To sound more advanced, you might say, the more you practice, the more confident you'll become. Or, fluency takes time, but every step you take brings you closer. Another way is, you're already improving, just keep going one day at a time. Or, stay motivated, you'll reach your goal. These are powerful sentences that connect directly to your journey as an English learner. And with that, we've practiced 130 essential English sentences for daily life, starting from the basics and building up to more advanced, natural expressions. You've done an amazing job following along, and I hope you feel more confident and ready to use these sentences in real conversations. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Remember, the key to fluency is practice, practice, and more practice. So keep using these sentences every day, in your thoughts, in your speaking, and in your listening. The more you use them, the more natural they will become. You're doing wonderfully, and I'm so proud of the progress you're making. Stay motivated, stay consistent, and never stop believing in yourself. And of course, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss future lessons. This is Sarah from Talk English Now, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Keep practicing and keep shining in your English journey.